And the trick is that once I'm sharing my screen, I can't really see how you're interacting. So we'll get to this. So anyway, so let's start. So hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are. I'm really glad you registered and you're attending today a short session in reality about CV writing. I call it How to Create a Successful and Impactful CV. And just before we start, 2 pieces of housekeeping. So everyone is on mute. That makes our life much easier in the meeting. And then throughout the presentation and when I will be talking, if you have any questions, please do drop those questions into the chat box. So there is a time at the end of the presentation and where I will be answering all the questions. And don't worry, the beauty of the chat is that if I don't manage, I'll answer all the questions today. I save all those questions and then we'll respond and send you the response to all of you, actually. I plan to do it tomorrow. So 2 things, everyone is on mute, yes, and then please do drop questions into the chat box. After I finish talking and presenting, there is at least 15 minutes where I will be answering all the questions you put in the chat box. And then, as I said, if there's something I won't be able to answer, I will answer via email and you will get it tomorrow. So let's have a look. So today's agenda is it's pretty simple in reality, but it's structured in a way that hopefully would help you go through your CV writing process in a much more structured and conscious way. So we'll talk about the basics. So what the purpose of CV really is, some general tips, for example, the layout. We'll talk about the magic of ATS, so applicant tracking system, and what it really means for writing CV. We'll briefly talk about the language. We will focus a lot throughout the whole workshop around reader experience, and we will talk about no lies rule. And then we'll go into the body of CV, and then we will talk about how to write impactful career story. And what it really means is that we will go section by section. We'll talk about the profile. So something that I call a professional handshake. So that's the important first part of your CV. We'll talk about core skills and competencies as really important section where we need to stay focused and really match and tailor our CV to really ensure maximum impact. Then we'll go to the work experience and we'll talk about how to best describe your responsibilities, how to present your achievements, how to structure your task description, and how to address career gaps. We'll then talk about education, courses, and qualifications, what goes in and how to structure that. We'll talk about interests and hobbies, and as I always put it jokingly, why listening to music and sports are really the worst descriptions to put on your CV. And then we'll talk about references, and GDPR is not the only reason to skip it. And then we'll have some summaries, some key takeaways, and we'll go into QA. That's why I keep saying, please pop the questions into chat as we go through the session. And then I will spend at least 15 minutes at the end really responding to all of your questions. So without further ado, just very briefly, who am I? Just to make sure that, because most of you have never met me, have never worked with me, and why would you trust what I think and what I say? So I am an ICF accredited coach. I'm also a Hogan certified assessor, so it's a tool for psychometrics. I spent many years working as a people development professional, designing, delivering transformational programs for companies like Barclays Bank in the US, in the UK, Deloitte in Switzerland, or Standard & Poor's in the UK as well. And I left the corporate world a few years ago, and I really work with people across the globe who want to work, lead, and live better. That's just a sample of my client base, people in leadership positions, startup founders, people in multinational companies like Novartis, Amazon, LinkedIn, and some managers in tech companies, for example, Twitch, if you're into gaming, or Coinbase. If you have your smartphone somewhere around you, you can just scan, and this QR code will be also at the end of the presentation if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn. But it will be also at the end, so don't worry. It's not the most important element of this presentation, actually. So let's go straight into the first element. So back to basics. Tell me why. I think the important thing is to remember that we write CV to get invited for an interview. And that's really important because this should be the job search and writing CV, cover letter, and the application process is a step step-by-step process. So the purpose of writing great impactful CV is really to convince whoever is reading it to invite you for an interview. And that's key to remember, because you know that it will be either read by a person or scanned by the system. So some basic rules that you always need to remember is to make it easy for a reader. I think that's, for me, the golden rule of writing CV, and that's the most important rule of writing CV. Remember that it will be read by somebody. You need to make it easy for the reader. It needs to be clean, spaced, structured, and brief. And I will show you in a moment the example. You always need to make it also relevant to the job. And I know we heard it many times, it needs to be tailored. It means that you need to tweak your CV to make sure that it really responds to the job that you're applying for. Don't be afraid to use keywords. They are especially important when your CV will be scanned by the applicant tracking system. And then also it will be important when the reviewer or the hiring manager or the recruiter is going to scan your CV. It works in a very simple way. If your CV includes the keywords that are included in the job description, then the system will scan it and see, oh, there is a match. And it will rank your CV in a certain way. The higher the score of your match, the higher in the ranking your CV will be. If your CV is screened by the recruiter, basically if they open it on the screen, what we want to see is that they immediately see the keywords that appear in the job description. So even without reading too much into your CV, they really immediately make the match. Make it work. Remember, the format, the hyperlinks, anything that you put in your CV needs to be flawless. There's no place for spelling mistakes. There's no space for broken hyperlinks. It will always work against you. And no lies. I'm not sure if any of you read Confessions of a Shopaholic, or maybe you read the book or watched the film. So the woman who is a main character in the film wanted to sexy up her CV, and she actually put that she speaks Finnish. But then the bad luck was that when she went for an interview for a perfect job, the person who was interviewing her actually spoke Finnish and started speaking Finnish with her. It's a funny, a bit tragic for her example, that absolutely under no circumstances do we lie in CV. Earlier, sooner or later, this will really come out. So thinking about this, look at my CV. And without even reading, what I want to just kind of highlight once more, those key things. It needs to be structured. It needs to be clean. You need to see the keywords. In this case, they are in bold font. And that will make it easy for the reader to scan it and see the information that we want them to see. So for example, I want to apply for a role in training development. So I highlighted the keywords to make sure that whoever is scanning my CV can immediately see projects, people development projects, onboarding programs, learning design, competencies and development models. Remember that whoever is looking at your CV, scanning it, it will be no more than 30 seconds at the beginning. So you want to make sure that the initial impression is positive and it's inviting them to continue reading. So the first element in the CV is the profile. So something that you put just under your contact details. And I always say that's a love at first sight, but more probably tangible, it's comparison to professional handshake. Think of it, if that's the only section of your CV that the recruiter or the hiring manager will read, at least at the first stage of screening, you think that you want to convince them to continue reading and convince them to really put your CV to the bucket saying, yes, we want to invite them for an interview. So it's, I use this comparison that imagine you meet someone who can really give you the job you want. And you have around 90, 120 seconds to tell them who you are, what your strengths are, what your key experience is, and what you really want to do. So that's why the profile needs to include your strengths, your key experience, your desires and ambitions. So what you're really looking for, what do you want to do professionally? It needs to be tailored to the role or the organization. So obviously, for example, if I apply to a company that I, for example, apply to non-governmental organizations to work with minorities, I would say that, for example, I want to use my experience and knowledge working for the organization that promotes human rights across the globe, right? And I wouldn't put the same sentence if I apply to the bank. So really think about this in this way, in a strategic way, that you show your experience, you show your skills, and you show them your ambitions and why you want to work for this particular organization. Remember, keywords, energy, and personality. Don't be afraid to put some personality in your CV. That's something that will make you stand out, especially if you're passionate about something, or especially if you want to work for, like me, for the human rights organizations, because of the experience that I have with, for example, some minorities. And that's the example, again, mine, because it's the easiest for the GDPR. So you see, the profile is not too long. In my case, it's probably 8-9 lines. It's really focused on the keywords that can be and should be visible to a person who is scanning the CV and really trying to match if you're really the candidate of interest. And I'm looking for a coach and mentor role with human rights organizations supporting disadvantaged communities. The last sentence really gives the flavor to what your motivation is and what your ambition is for life in reality, and working life definitely. And just a word of caution. So the profile doesn't come super easy, and you may have few versions, and you may go back and tweak the version that you already have. And maybe you will go back and tweak the version every time you send CV. And it's fine. It's fine, because every time you ask yourself, what is the key strength for this role? My key strength. What do I really want to do? And why do I want to work for this organization? And profile is super important. Imagine that you give someone a handshake, and then based on that, you think about, do I continue conversation or not? And then we move to the body, the work experience, which usually is the most daunting for most people. And it's understandable, because we are very precious about the experience we had in our life. So often we just put everything. Also, we don't really regularly update our CV. Probably we just take the last version, just copy and paste some stuff and just add it on. But I encourage you to think about some basic rules, because I always say the devil is in the detail. So think about basics. So we always put the role, the company, and the dates. It needs to be structured, focused, and action-oriented. So rather thinking without storytelling and describing in vague terms, just state clearly what you did and what you achieved. I was responsible for providing data analysis to the board. My task was to coordinate and manage the library resources. Be clear about your role in the task, and ideally, if possible, give some numbers, some impact, and really give a lot of info about your achievements. So the impression needs to be that, it needs to be clear about what your role was in the process, what you actually did, and what you really achieved. The important thing is to match the job description. So we make sure that we only include relevant tasks, relevant words, and even pay attention to the order of importance. So if you look at the job description, that, for example, task number 1 was providing data, task number 2 was managing stakeholders. In your CV, you order those tasks in the same way. It makes it easier for A, the system to scan it, B, the recruiter to scan it and actually match you immediately. But I want to highlight the word relevant, and I'm just going to go into my example. As much as you want to sometimes put all of your experience, focus on those activities that are relevant to the role that you're applying for. They are not really interested in your activities that maybe they were great, but they are not related to the role that you're applying for. You wanted them to see that you are A, capable of doing the role, B, have experience doing similar things or exactly the same things. My example from my last role from the UK is very simple and it's very short, even though I wanted to make it much larger. You just put, as I said, the company, the dates, the role. In my case, it's just one-liner describing the role, and then main achievements. You can call them main tasks. You can call them just simple tasks or deliverables. But then look at this. It's structured, bullet points. They are not very long sentences. They are focused on things like program, manage, design, delivery, responsible for the design, delivered something, managed something, and keywords should be in bold font ideally. So while you look at this, those words jump at you, and you can immediately connect this candidate, in this case me, to the role that this person is applying for. And then we move to the education. And the funny thing is that why knitting course may not be the key to success. And I immediately go into this section, just the relevant ones. So even though some of us have completed numerous courses and we have a lot of additional qualifications, the same rule applies here. You only put those that are relevant to the role that you're applying for. Ideally, if you have education and courses, you split them into two different categories. If you have certifications and professional bodies membership, you split them into separate categories. It makes your CV cleaner, easier to understand, and it's just less risk of someone being confused and just giving up on reading your CV. Obviously, the hierarchy of writing in chronological order is that you put your latest courses at the top. So for example, if I completed something this month, it would be the course number 1, and then you just go back. I often get questions about languages. That should be a separate category, remember, don't mix it up with anything else. And you have to have clear description of your level. So if you use, for example, common European framework, which I have, which is A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, stick to it. Or you can just use easy descriptions, working knowledge, elementary knowledge. I've also seen some people use the graphical representations. For example, you can see someone saying, let's say French, 3 icons, like 3 stars and 3 boxes. So that's the example of my education. Membership in professional organization, 1 section for certification, education from the latest to the oldest, so to say, and languages. I have native level, working knowledge, communication level. Keep it simple, keep it short, keep it clean, and keep it relevant. And my courses, I completed a few more, but I just completely ditched them because they are not relevant in any way to the role that I would be applying for. Okay. The section that a lot of people love/hate. First of all, do not force it. I think that's probably the rule I should start with. And what I mean by don't force it, don't feel like you need to put your interest there. Because if you put I like sports or music, I mean, really. So if you want to make it, if you want to really put your interest in your CV, really make it personal. Absolutely no bland or generic things. It just doesn't add value and doesn't let the reader get to know you a bit more. So for example, I have examples here. Instead of saying I like music, if you really like specific kind of music, put it in. I'm interested in the 19th century classical music. Or I like sports, really. I mean, like watching, doing, I don't know. I play rugby in my free time in an amateur club. Extreme sports, be specific, I like paragliding. And the reason also for that is that be ready to talk about this. So do not come up with a hobby that, for example, or interest that you don't really follow through. Because if you get asked about this in the interview, then obviously it doesn't work in your favor. So make it personal, be ready to talk about this, and do not force it. This is the section called core skills. I don't have, by the way, I don't have interests. For example, I don't have interest section. I do have interest, but I don't have interest in my CV section. I just don't think they add value to the roles that I'm applying for. That's why I don't show it to you. But this is the section I want to draw your attention. So core skills and competencies. Show me your superpowers. This is a very useful section for, I think, 2 types of candidates. One is that people who would like to pivot and change their careers. And for example, their experience might not immediately match with the experience that the role that you're applying for. For example, I have a client who wants to move from working in the pharmaceutical industry to work in the engineering world. So it's a completely different world, and immediately his CV would be like, oh, what's that? That's the odd one out. So skills and competencies section allow you to show your transferable skills. So you would put it just under the profile section at the top. And it would mean that the reader starts reading about your transferable skills, your superpowers, your strengths in reality, instead of just going straight into your experience and immediately maybe thinking, oh, he never worked in engineering, right? So that's the CV that will not read. Oh. The second group of people that would benefit from this is people who don't have a lot of experience. For example, you're a recent graduate, or maybe you have not worked so long. That's also a very useful section. So you want to draw the reader's attention to your skills, your competences, that might actually be useful in the role that you're applying for. So as I said here, it's a separate section if you want to highlight your specific competences and skills rather than experience. Think and focus on two groups. So technical skills, for example, if you apply for a specific technical role and maybe in your free time you've gained some skills, and focus on transferable skills. And then think about tasks and achievements. So if there's that makes sense, obviously also put some tasks and achievements to really back it up, those competencies and skills that you have. Maybe you did something in your free time and you did something outside your core experience in your previous job, but if that adds some kind of additional value, it shows your skills and abilities and competencies that might otherwise be overlooked, definitely go for it. Right? So that's, for example, my example. So excellent project management skills, ability to conduct global learning needs, well-developed communication influencing skills, familiarity with competency models, proficient user of digital learning design tools, and I give the examples, and experience managing and implementing learning management systems. So that's something that kind of, gathers and groups the core skills and competencies that I have and might not necessarily be that well showcased in my detailed descriptions of my roles. So we'll go one more time through this section just as a reminder, but I would say 5 key things and golden rules that I would like you to remember. And I think rule number 1 is absolutely critical for me. So it's about thinking about the reader. So always put yourself in the reader's shoes. It needs to be clean and easy to read CV. It needs to be matched to the job. So remember about the words that you use, the tasks, how you describe them, the skills and competences that you use in the CV, and highlight them with the bold font ideally. You want them to jump out of the CV and make sure that people really are drawn to those words in this, especially in this initial screening phase when you have about 8 to 30 seconds to draw their attention. Write like a pro. Active words, focused descriptions, informative, but don't think about long, vague, and generic sentences. Think of last time when you were reading a book or an article or even piece of content on social media. If it's long, vague, and generic, you don't really spend time. You get lost, you get bored, you're not reading it. It's the same with CV. If it's not sharp, if it's not active, if it's not focused, no one's going to bother reading it, especially if they get 100 or 200 CVs. Be yourself. It's always difficult to say what does it mean, but for me, be yourself means basically add some flavor, be bold in describing some of those things you did. Don't shy away from your achievements. Just especially in the profile, state your, I would say, reason for applying in a very bold way sometimes. Highlight the things that probably for many years you have not been highlighting in your CVs. And double and triple read and check. If possible, probably print it out. Sometimes we get surprised how many still mistakes and spelling things we catch when we print out our CVs and documents. But definitely check all those things like hyperlinks, spelling, because that's basically one of the reasons why your CV might be rejected. So before we go into questions, I just want to scan one more time, scan the keyword, and just go through each of the section one more time and just remind ourselves, all of us, this is the profile. Think of it as a handshake. You introduce yourself, you meet me in the elevator, and you want to tell me, hi, I'm Pete, I'm Pamela. I have this and this experience, and I'm really great at doing this. I would really love to work for a company that takes care of human rights, for example. Do this mental exercise and think of yourself and visualize yourself in the situation of you being in the elevator, being at the, I don't know, kids' party in McDonald's when the pandemic is over. And you have one in a lifetime opportunity for you to tell someone who can give you the job you want, who you are, what you're good at, and what do you really want. It will really come handy, not in writing CV only, but in all your conversations about your career, in your interview, when you write your cover letter. But on a personal level, I think it's a great self-empowering exercise when you can really understand your drivers and your motivations and what you really, really want to do. Then when we go to the experience, remember about the key rules: the company, the role, the date, and then go into descriptions. Action verbs, short bullet points, keywords highlighted. Do not write long stories. Show the impact you had. Make sure it's clear what you really did, what your achievements were. One thing to remember, again, thinking about self-empowering, is that look back at your career and look back at your experience and ask yourself a question every time you write about certain role. What are you really proud of most? What was your achievement in this role? And be really honest and don't be really shy. I think own it and then just, I would say, translate it into words and really write about this. Ask yourself the question, what am I really proud of? What did I really achieve here? And put it on paper and make it stand out using keywords, using bullet points, and showing everything that you can bring into the role. Then education, as I said, keep it simple, keep it structured, keep it separate: courses, education, languages, certifications. Think about the reader again. I know it will sound like a stuck record, but that's very, very important. We as humans, if we get too confused, we get lost, we don't read it. You don't want that. About languages, be consistent in the labeling, so to say, in descriptions, either the common European framework, or if you live somewhere else, if you use somewhere else, it needs to be clear what level is your language. And obviously don't lie. And obviously, if you have, by the way, any certificates to prove it, you can as well put it in the CV as well. Hobbies, I don't have it because, as I said, I don't put it on my CV, but if you decide to put the hobbies and interests in your CV, make it personal, be ready to talk about this, and don't force it. Really, it's not the most important part of your CV. And if you get an interview, and if you start getting to know people that you might be working with, in the conversation, you can always talk about your interest. CV is not, maybe it's not the most important part of your CV. And competencies and skills, it's a superpower section, another part of your CV where can you really have this reflection moment about what I'm really good at, what are my transferable skills. So skills that you can do in other roles, not only, for example, if I'm a project manager, but I have a lot of skills like communication, organization, administration, stakeholder management that you can do in any other role in reality. Make them stand out again, be clear about describing them. Think about technical and transferable skills and put this section just underneath your profile. So your CV starts with this section, especially if you're doing the career pivot, career transition, completing studies, or you don't feel like you have enough experience in this particular field. Think about the reader, match to the job, write like a pro, be yourself, and double and triple check. All right, let's try, and we'll go there. Let's try to go to the questions. Okay, let's see. I will send so the first question is, are we going to have the access to the PowerPoint, please? So I will send the recording, so you will get the access to the recording afterwards, meaning tomorrow. Is it required to put a photo in your CV? It's actually an important question, and it's a very useful question. There are a few things around photo and basic information that you put in your CV. One thing is the country that you live in. So I live in Switzerland. where putting your CV is, I would say, not maybe mandatory, but it's customary. People put their photo in their CV. But I know in other countries this is not the rule. And in some countries, actually, it's forbidden, I think, to put things like your photo, the age, or the gender. So it's worth checking in the so-called jurisdiction location where you live and work and where you apply to see what kind of information is required. It may differ in different markets. So we'll look at another question. Is necessary a professional handshake if you're applying to the university for higher studies? It's a very good question. I had it last time I ran this session, and someone asked me this question thinking about cover letter, but also about the CV. I would say yes, because like we did in the career profile, the question was what can I offer, what value I can bring. The same would be, why do we want to study something? And then if you write even 2 or 3 lines in your CV with the additional value, with the additional information about your desire to study something, it adds, to be honest, to your application, right? If you state, I don't know, I want to study, I will go with the easy example. I want to study medicine because I've always wanted to help people and cure cancer, or help people who are sick. That means that you give additional information about your ambitions and about, I would say, motivators for your choice of certain studies. Are these just headings, or do they require more text? Are these just headings, or do they require? Sally, I may not be clear exactly. Are these just headings, or do they require more text? You can just pop in the chat. Maybe I don't understand it fully. So, is it possible to have the PowerPoint? Yes. What are your comments about one-page CV role? Well, if you can squeeze everything after ruthless review on 1 page, I think it's amazing. I think I wouldn't be obsessed with 1-page rule. I would be more focused when we think about applying for a certain role, to make sure that you include in your CV the information that are relevant for this particular role, right? So squeeze out and cut out all the information that are not really relevant, that may not add to your profile, but if that's beyond 1 page, to be honest, I wouldn't freak out. I would say 2 pages is fine. I used to have 4 pages of CV because of the number of years I worked, and no one has ever told me it's too long, to be honest. Obviously, I've seen CVs of 10 pages, definitely it's a no-go. But yeah, don't be obsessed with 1 page. If you can squeeze everything on 1 page, it's absolutely amazing. But if you cannot, just don't worry about this. Okay, can we look at experience versus skills again? Experience examples of work, what's the number of skills to identify? Oh, as many skills as you want, but thinking about the rule, let me just go back to skills, and I will share my screen. It's here. Okay. So hopefully you can see it. So the question was, how many skills? First of all, I would say think about all the skills that you think are important for the role. So imagine looking at this example, that I'm applying for a role, let's say, of a project manager in a learning organization. That means that I want to highlight in my core skills and competencies those skills that would play with this particular role, right? So for example, I wouldn't put here that I have, I don't know, engineering skills or something like that, because it's not really relevant to the role. So stick and list as many skills and competencies as you think, or as you see, will match you with the role that you're applying for, right? And I think you had a second part of the question. I'll just stop sharing. Okay. Okay, thank you for disclaimer. What are your thoughts regarding secondary school and grades on your CV? Does this go too far back and you should only... So the question is about adding secondary school and grades on my CV. Oh, you can see it, sorry. So I would say that you need to read carefully depending where you apply. So obviously, if you're applying for some academic role, they might want some education information which goes beyond our, let's say, regular thing. So maybe they require longer information in terms of secondary school. Maybe they will require transcripts, but I wouldn't put it on the CV. So as a rule, The university or the high school is I think in America it's probably higher, the college is probably the lowest. So do not go too far history, right? And then if they require grades or secondary school, that usually is a second section in the application, which is not during your CV. So just after this rambling answer, on your CV, unless you're specifically asked to provide secondary school and grades, I would say no. And there should be a second different section where you can put those information. But on the CV, college, university, probably, or the latest or the highest level of education, if sometimes that's what they ask. And the design tips. I would say I had this question once because someone asked me how wide you can go if you're a graphic designer. I think about one golden rule, that remember that the form shouldn't overshadow the content, right? So, and remember who is going to read your CV. So obviously, if you apply, for example, for a graphic designer role, it may be fancy advertising agency, maybe some quirky design would work, and that would be very welcome. But if you apply, for example, for a role within the bank, I would imagine that probably just stick to some conservative approach and layout. So, so in terms of the design, before I answer the next question, in terms of the design, I would say keep it clean and introduce maybe some good ideas. I don't know if even if the way of you use colors, do not always stick to just black and white. Maybe if you think about languages or maybe skills, that's something you can introduce some kind of other graphical elements, but always think also about the reader and the role in the company that you're applying for. Obviously, probably some of you have seen that now people started doing video CVs. If that's something you would like to try, I would say I encourage you to do it, but also it depends on what kind of company you're applying to, right? I was focusing on what key needs for the job. If you have some innovative ideas for new developments, would they be relevant? Yes. That's actually an interesting question, because if you apply for something and you have some ideas and potentially you've started working on something that might be very relevant, you definitely need to put in your CV. It's always the question how you really phrase it and how you will pitch it in your CV. But yeah, definitely. You can, if you feel bold enough and if it's really very connected with the role that you're applying, I would potentially advise you to try to put it in the profile. So let's say you apply for the role. I'm trying to think. Maybe you can help me. But let's say you have a suggestion how you can, let's say, design something, and you're applying for the role of a chief designer for this particular product. I would put it in my profile saying, I'm a very creative, experienced designer, and looking at the job descriptions, I think I have some great ideas that I would love to share with you, things like that. But definitely, if you have some ideas, find the right place in your CV to at least pitch it without really describing and kind of selling everything. I hope it answered the question. Let's see if there's any question that I potentially missed. Just see. Excuse, how to handle career gaps in the CV? I would say be honest. Be honest, and if you have a gap in your CV, I would potentially flag it in your CV, to be honest, and just say, well, depending on obviously the reason. But yeah, there are two strategies. One is just put if it's longer than a few months, you may want to put the dates in and just say, I don't know, maternity leave or relocation, traveling, one sentence. If it's shorter than probably 6 months, I will honestly do not mention it unless you believe it brings some important information and explains everything. But yeah, that's my rule. If it's more than 1 year, I would definitely put it in the CV. So to immediately address any concern that someone might have, sort of looking at the CV thinking, oh, what has he been doing for 4 years, right? Especially, for example, where I operate in the market with a lot of mothers, unfortunately, it's the case here, drop out of the workforce for a few years when they have kids. So you normally see CVs of women with few years gap. Well, I wouldn't like to assume, but normally it is mainly because of the childcare. What about having a wide variety of work experience where dates are not chronological? wide variety of work experience where dates are not chronological. Just trying. Okay, so first I will tackle the simple one, hopefully. Do you have any tips for creating an ATC compliant CV? Oh, yes. ATC compliance, for everyone who maybe joined later, applicant tracking system. It means that basically the machine will scan your CV. So what you want to do is to make sure there are two things. Your CV is clean. So bullet points are great, actually. So no long sentences. Bullet points, brief, short descriptions of your responsibilities, and the keywords will be the key to success. So remember, the machine will not think about what you have in your CV. They will purely, I would say, look at the number of words that match in your CV and match the job description, which basically means that, let's say, if you, and it scores you. So it would say that, for example, out of 100 words, keywords, and it's worth remembering, determined by the hiring manager or the recruiter, out of 100 words, you had 70, 50, 97. It gives your CV a ranking, and that it ranks your CVs in this order, and then only then the recruiter will see it. So answering the question, bullet points and keywords, absolutely keywords. That's something you have to nail, to be honest. But one thing, do not copy paste job description and paste it in your CV. It's a no-go. But think about keywords, but it's simple. So it's like managing project. Obviously, that's a good example. One, if you have project in the job description, use the word project. Competency model, use the competency model. But do not copy paste the whole sentences and descriptions from the job description. It's a no-go. I'm thinking about, sorry, this question, what about having a wide? You have to, so the question is, what about having a wide variety of work experience where dates are not chronological, how to deal with these gaps? You need to think about, and sometimes it's worth asking someone who will read it, if it's clear how you order and how to write it, if it's clear that it shows some story there, especially if it's non-chronological. You may want to add a short description and explanation in brackets, right? To make sure that the person who is reading and looking at this, it doesn't get confused just by looking at this, because they will look for chronological dates and they will not see them. So you want to explain, I don't know, I had a portfolio career, I was contracting, I was moving, give the explanation in the brackets and try to put them in the, try to always think about the latest as the one at the top, and then just, again, work through the, I would say, the order backwards as much as it's possible. But if you mean that you have overlaps, that's fine, but always still try to keep this order that the latest role is the first one, and then even if there are overlaps, they just go backwards. Would you add links like to your blogs, social media? And if you, in this age of social media, and let's be honest, recruiters will look at your LinkedIn definitely. I would say yes, and I'm assuming there's nothing illegal, there's nothing dirty, there's nothing, you know, that would breach any potential law. Then if it adds additional information about you, especially LinkedIn, for example, yes, definitely yes. For things like Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, or I don't know, TikTok, I would probably think twice. If you're applying for a role where, for example, social media element is an important element and it adds value to your profile, definitely yes. Otherwise, it's a no. And that's just my answer. But rest assured, first of all, that the recruiters will look at your social media if they manage to find it. So it's not a word of caution, it's just the reality. So always be mindful of what you really put out on your social media, and just probably that's the advice, keep it clean. And one important thing, if you definitely have LinkedIn profile, make sure that actually your CV matches to LinkedIn as well. So things like dates, job titles, even sometimes location where you are, that this is more or less the information that you have on your CV and on your LinkedIn profile. How about the resume size? I mean, if you mean, Paula, by the number of pages, I think we talked about briefly, do not get too obsessed with it. I would say between 2 and 4 pages. 4 obviously is max. Try to be closer to 2 pages than 4. If you're able to do 1 page, I think it's amazing. But I think most of us who have had few years of experience will have at least 2 pages of experience, of resume. And don't worry that, for example, you have 3 pages. Remember that the recruiter or hiring manager will focus on your last 2 roles. That's the reality. And they will all basically focus on your first page. So that's why the first page is absolutely critical. And as I said, they will look at your 2, maximum 3 roles, at least in the stage where they look at your CV. In the interview, that's a completely different story. They will go back. So obviously be prepared to talk about this. But in the screening and before interviewing before inviting you for an interview, they will only look at the first page, second page as well, but definitely last 2, 3 rows. I think I've answered, just have a look here. Yeah, I think I've answered all the questions. Okay, I struggle with the difference between describing role in a past employment and giving examples of projects. Describing a role in past employment and giving examples of projects. So when you describe, maybe it's easier to look at the question is, I struggle with the difference between describing role in past employment and giving examples of projects. So then think, and you will know obviously your experience much better, but just shooting the ideas now, maybe it makes sense to structure your description of the employment slightly different. Instead of, for example, role description and achievements, maybe the role description, for example, I was responsible for, let's say, PMO, project management office in this company with the responsibility for delivering project for this type of business. And then you have a section which basically says projects. And then you list those projects as a separate section in the employment part, if that makes sense for the role that you held in this company. So in a way, be creative to make sure that it shows your work best, to be honest. But looking at your question, I would probably structure in this way. The examples of projects, just a separate section, and probably a smaller section, but definitely different section with some basic description of the role and some basic responsibilities. Hopefully that helps a bit, and I encourage you to try and see if that reads well, if that looks well, and if that's something that you would like to do. So we have a few more minutes. So if you still have any questions, please pop them in. And so as I said, so I will send you the presentation. I'll send you the recording tomorrow with some additional material, because I promised, and I will send you, for example, my one-pager around writing a cover letter. But if you want to connect with me, if you have, for example, your phone with you, if you can just use your camera and you can scan my QR code that will link us on LinkedIn. You can just visit my website. But as I said, tomorrow I will send you a kind of follow-up with the recording and also with some additional materials around cover letter. And hopefully you'll be able to use it. But before I finish, and maybe there will be some question, I always, whatever I said here, I encourage you to think about your writing CV in a slightly different way. So obviously I've mentioned some golden rules, and always focus on those things like the reader, what the message you want to show in your CV, think about the keywords, make it clean, make it structured, but use it really as I encourage you to use it as exercise in looking at your full career so far and ask yourself those questions. And yes, again, I will repeat them, but I think they are very important. So what are you really most proud of? What are the biggest achievements of your careers? And maybe what are your smaller achievements of your career? What do you see as a story of yours if you write your CV? What are your ambitions? What are your drivers? What do you really want to do? What kind of role you want to do next, and what kind of company you want to work for. And when some of those questions might be difficult at first, they will really help you write your CV in a way that it's much more empowering, really, and you will feel much more confident going into interviews and really nailing them, because I've interviewed hundreds of people in my life, and I've helped a lot of people writing their CVs and going for interviews, and it's a completely different experience when you gain confidence about your professional story. It's amazing. And we look at, come on, I've been there. We look at writing CV as some chore, right? For all of us, it's just, for most of us, it's just like, oh my God, I need to write a CV. But once we have a slightly different mindset, it really can change the way we really talk and think about our career. And I really encourage you to try it. And it's not super easy. I'm sure you will all nail it. Maybe not the first, but maybe the second time. And don't worry if you get mad and start swearing, writing and drafting your CV, and then you will have version number 6 or 7, because that's the reality. That's how it really works. And, but the underlying message is that writing CV is about telling your personal story, right? And I think that's very, very important. And that's something that probably is very intangible. Let me have a look, because I think there are questions. Okay, so let's have a look. How far back should you go? No, I would say 10 years is max. If you really want to tell something about beyond 10 years, you just put the company, the year, and the title of the role without really long descriptions. Don't worry, 10 years is max. Okay, thank you. Oh, thank you. Oh, okay, no more questions. Thank you. We have a few more minutes. So as I said, you will receive from me. Okay. Oh yes, definitely. So that's also a very important question. Is it important to include experiences out of my field, but that's able to show? Absolutely, absolutely. Because don't look at your career in a silo approach, right? Like I've always worked in pharma, and I've always been project manager, but it means that then if you, for example, suddenly work for a year even as an admin person or in Starbucks, don't laugh. It shows other skills that you have. It shows additional skills that you have, and it really enriches your story and your CV, because it means that you're able, first of all, to be flexible, to do something else, to tap into your potential, to use different skills, and to do something different. All right, last 3 minutes. No, I'm really grateful for all of you guys who participated today, and apologize. I think probably I've got some emails from people who couldn't join because of some issues with access. But as I said, find me on LinkedIn. Probably is the easiest. I blab a lot on LinkedIn. I will send you tomorrow the pack, so to say. But I really want you to go away from this session thinking about your CV as your, I don't even know the word. CV is really one of your most powerful tools for yourselves, to be honest, to think about yourself as kind of superheroes, and think about what you achieved so far and how much you can bring to any role that you will get, and really use this exercise to gain more confidence. I mean, it's amazing what you can do when you start looking at yourself and thinking about ourselves more positively. And all of you have different stories and probably different struggles that you've overcome, which made you who you are now. And you can bring so much to the roles and companies that you will work for. And probably most important, you will bring so much value to the people that you will work for, and work with. So probably that's my biggest takeaway. And that's also from my personal experience, being on both sides of the story, being a person who was looking for work for many years and helping others to find work for many years, and being the one who was interviewing people for many years. And it's such an interesting, but challenging sometimes moment in our lives. So with this, I'm going to shut up and wish you all wonderful rest of the day, wonderful rest of the week. I hope you're all safe. And I hope that, this year will be better than last one. And once again, thank you very much for joining today. And go away from the session thinking that you are superheroes, and your CV should reflect it. So thank you. Goodbye.